Hello, everyone. Welcome to Your Bible Questions Answered. I'm your host, Dr. Douglas Hamp. Looking forward to getting into your questions today. If you want to submit a question, you can do it right here in the chat while this show is going live, or you can also download the Way Congregation app and you can put your question in the chat during the week and I will get to it. So if I don't get to your question this week, put it in. I'll do my very best to get to it next week. Let's jump into the questions because we have a lot of great questions. These are coming from the app, in case you're wondering where I'm getting these questions. There's some really good questions, and I'm looking forward to taking a look at these. The first one is coming from Iris. She says, is the book of the covenant and the book of the law the same book? Iris, great question. So let's understand, this is a common misconception that people often have, is that covenant and law are the same thing. Now, what happened at Mount Sinai was a covenant, right? And there was a covenant made between God and Israel. We see this in Exodus. God tells them in Exodus 19, hey, get ready because I'm going to come on down, right? And so God comes down. He's got this amazing fireworks show. He then he speaks the 10 words or the 10 commandments, and the people are afraid and they say to Moses, you go up. All right. Right. Better that you go. So Moses goes up, he comes back down and he tells them, well, they say, all that the Lord has said, we will do. Right. You see this in Exodus 24. And that is where God and Israel enter into a covenant marriage relationship. Now, in case you're wondering, where do I get this idea that we're actually looking at some kind of a marriage contract? Let's go to Jeremiah 31, 32, actually. He says, he's going to make a new covenant, but not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant, which they broke, though I was a husband to them, says the Lord. All right, so what was that covenant? It was a marriage contract. And then he says he's going to make a new covenant. And guess what? He's going to put in their hearts and minds. He's going to put his law. See this word right here? Law in the Hebrew, it's the word Torah, right? So Torah and law, Torah and instructions is the same, right? Law, instructions, Torah, but it's different than covenant. That's the word brit in Hebrew. They're two different ideas, even though they contain some of similar language. But the covenant that God made with Israel back at Mount Sinai was a marriage contract. That marriage, sadly, ended in divorce, not because God did anything wrong, but because Israel was unfaithful. Israel kept going after false gods. In fact, we see that right away in the book of Exodus, where Israel went after the golden calf, right? And that was just the beginning of Israel going after these false gods. We see this many, many places, but it is certainly pronounced when we get to King Solomon, that because of his many wives, and I'm not blaming the women, I'm blaming Solomon, but he was certainly influenced, and he made all kinds of high places that were actually in the area of Gehenna or Gay Ben Hinnom, okay, the valley of the son of Hinnom, right? And he made this a place called the Mount of Corruption, and he sacrificed to Molech, to Chemosh, right? To all these terrible gods that demanded child sacrifice. Yeah, Solomon did that. And so then God said after that, okay, that's it. I'm going to split the kingdom in two. I'm going to give Israel, the 10 tribes of Israel, I'm going to give that to Jeroboam. But because I made promises to David, I will not take the kingdom away entirely from Solomon's kids. And so that's essentially what happened. Then it continued to spiral out of control in the northern kingdom, and God finally said, "Okay, that's it. We're getting divorced." And we see that in the book of Hosea, chapters 1 and 2. And then, of course, in Jeremiah, we see it in chapter 3. God says he gave her a certificate of divorce. And then, as I just read there in Jeremiah 31:31, there's going to be a new covenant. And who established that new covenant? Well, God did. God incarnate, right? God in the flesh, God with us. The word became flesh and dwelt among us. That's the God I'm talking about, Jesus. He came and he died to cancel the old contract and all of the stipulations and obligations and penalties that went with it. And then he rose and established a new covenant, right? And he tells us as much at the Last Supper or the Passover dinner there. And he says that this is my body broken for you. And he says, this is the blood of the new covenant, right? So that all happened through the person of Jesus. Now, per the question, are the book of the law and the book of the covenant the same? Um, they're probably different in that nuance that I just explained. Okay. Now, some people want to say, well, because it's the book of the covenant or the book of the law, then it maybe doesn't apply to me. But as we just saw there in Jeremiah 31:32, God says he's going to write his law, his Torah on our hearts. In which covenant? In the new covenant. All right. So that's just something to think about. All right. Thank you, Iris. That really was a great question. All right. Ewut asked the question. He says, could you please explain Revelation 2:9? So many people are posting on social media and saying that Jews aren't really the Jews, and there's this book about the 13th tribe. And some are even going as far as calling them the synagogue of Satan. Others are even going as far as saying that the Jewish elite control the world. A lot of time, Revelation 2:9 is used as reference to justify their claims. Can you please talk about what or who Revelation 9 is talking about? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's go to Revelation 2:9. All right, so this is the church of Smyrna. These things says the first and last, who was dead and came alive. I know your works, tribulation, and poverty, but you're rich. And I know the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Now, if somebody says that they are Jews, but they're not actually Jews, but they're really, in fact, a congregation, a synagogue, a place of gathering for Satan's followers, that literally could be anybody, right? It's easy to defame somebody else. You can pose as many other people. In fact, in today's age, we know that with avatars and stuff, somebody can come out and say, hey, I'm actually Doug, right? But I'd never actually said that, right? So that doesn't invalidate me in any way. It invalidates the person that is posing as me. All right, so Jews are actually Jews. Remember, Jesus was Jewish. Peter, Paul, James, they were Jewish. All the guys in the New Testament were Jewish in that sense. Of course, Luke was not, but they were very much Jewish. All right, so we need to be very, very careful. Now, there are some people who are claiming, according to this text, they're claiming that they're actually Jews, and here Jesus is saying no, they're actually not the real deal. So again, we've got to be very, very careful. Let's go back into history. Let's think about Korah's rebellion. All right, so Korah, he was part of the nation of Israel, but was the truth of the God that he served truly in his heart? I would say it really wasn't. All right. So he was in on an ethnic basis, but as far as going after the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, well, he really wasn't. King Saul, in his latter years, showed himself to very much not be part of the ones that were true worshipers of God, even though he had the name, but he did not actually follow what that was saying. Now, this is where we have to be very, very careful, because I know there's a lot of slander that is going around. But let's think about World War II and the Holocaust. There were many, many Jews at that time who said they did not want to be Jews. They wanted to just live a regular life. They were happy to convert, but their enemies, mainly the Nazis and those with them said, no, 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 it doesn't matter. You're Jewish, and that's that, and we're going to kill you. And of course, that is what happened much of the time, unfortunately. So there is very much an ethnic thing. It has not been easy by any stretch of the imagination to be Jewish, ethnically Jewish, for the last 2,000 years. We could argue even longer, but we'll just keep our focus on that. All right. So it has not been easy to be Jewish. So very few people are going to come out and say, well, I'm actually Jewish, and they're going to make this big thing about it to somehow you don't score points when you come out and you say you're Jewish. Now, we don't know what was happening here in Smyrna. It could be that there were people that were going around claiming to be Jewish in order to do what? In order to defame the real Jews and to make it look like, you see, well, this is actually what Jews are doing, right? So we've to be so careful. This is where rumors start coming out. There was a rumor that happened in the Middle Ages about Jews who were taking Christian children and they were killing them and drinking their blood on Passover and all kinds of other such nonsense. Were those in any way created by Jews? No, they were not. But those were rumors that were used by various people to defame the Jewish people. Now, it's very disturbing for me, and I say this as someone who leads a messianic congregation. Right, we meet on the Sabbath, we meet on Saturdays. We are very, very Jew friendly, um, and I hear sometimes I overhear it in the hallways once in a while. Sometimes I hear it on the internet. I hear it on Facebook and other places where people are defaming the Jews. I've heard it in Hebrew Roots kind of programs where they're blaming the Jews, and there's this whole theory about how the Khazars are actually the so-called Jews today, and that is a terrible theory. I stand firmly against it, um, and of course, they're going to use a passage like this, of which very little is actually said about it, but they're going to try to use this to defame the ethnic Jews today. Now, just because somebody is ethnically Jewish does not necessarily mean that they're following the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We know that there are some who are not. But there are also, on the other hand, there are many who are. And I lived in Israel for 3 years. I met many, many good, godly Jewish people. Now, I'm not saying that they believed in Jesus as their Messiah, but they did believe, and they do believe, in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And they are passionate about him. They love him. They're zealous for him. Do they have all their theology together? No, not all of it. Do I have all of my theology together? Probably not, right? I don't know what I'm missing, but I'm probably missing something. So this is where we've got to be very careful. And I would encourage everyone to stand firmly against such arguments where there's a defamation of the Jewish people. Okay. It doesn't mean that we stick our heads in the sand and say that everything Jewish people do is always right. We're not saying that. No more than everything that Americans do is always right. Okay. That would be silly to suggest such a position. But insofar as God does love the Jewish people, yes, he very much does. And he has a plan for the Jewish people. Yes, he very much does. And I will stand with them um, forever. Okay. Now, Ed Wood goes on and kind of clarifies his question. He says, I have a family member that's going deep into some of these conspiracy theories on the internet. There really seems to be no limit to the nonsense this family member will believe and then attempt to teach the rest of us on. Personally, in my past, I have also made the mistake of going down that rabbit hole. I think it's very destructive. My question is it better to engage this family member and tell them to stop, or is it better for me to rather be slow to speak? That is a really tough one. I have to say, it's a really tough question because we know that when you throw your pearls before swine, you might be wasting your time. Okay, not that their family members are swine, but when we try to teach someone who's not willing to listen, then we can be wasting our time and wasting our breath. But, if your family member is so eager to teach, maybe you could say, I would love to have a conversation with you if you are also willing to listen to another perspective. All right. So that may be something to think about. Now, part of the challenge, let's be fair. Part of the challenge is that there are things that certain individual Jews over the years have done that are not so good. There was a man named Shabtai Tzvi. He was born June 18th in 1666. He was Jewish and he claimed to be the Antichrist. Interesting. And he was born during the time of the Ottoman Empire. And part of his shtick was um, that people should be sinning in order to hasten the coming of the Messiah. I don't quite know how that all worked in his mind, but these are some of the claims that he made. And of course, part of that had to do with money, some had to do with sex, and various other things. All right, as it always goes. So he was then finally given a choice by the Sultan. Hey, you can either become a Muslim or you can die. If you're the Messiah, then those are your two options. Well, he sort of went underground and went into Islam so that he could keep his head. He figured that was better. This guy was, of course, a shark. He was terrible. He was a charlatan, and obviously, he was not the Messiah. You also have Rabbi Akiva, who was claiming that. Uh, Simon Bar Kosiba or Bar Kokhba, also known as, was the Messiah. Clearly, he wasn't the Messiah. Right. So there have been some false claims. There have been some dubious characters, just like every people group has. Okay, every people group has had their Jack the Rippers, as it were, and we've got to account for that and allow for that. But to demonize the entire race of the Jewish people is absolutely terrible. I think it's disgusting. I think it's evil. Um, I just don't even have nice words at all to speak to that. But if your family member is open to having a real discussion, then why don't you talk about this and say, let's talk about all the good Jews that are out there that truly love the Lord. Okay. So I also know that there are many other groups out there. There's the Black Israelite community. They're suggesting that they are the only true Jews. And any Jew who's of a white color is obviously fake, according to them. And again, that is very, very dangerous and inflammatory language. The Jewish people have been scattered throughout the world. You can find a synagogue in almost every country in the world. And, that there should be some darker skinned Jews. I have no problem with that. I think that's absolutely logical, but it doesn't detract from the fact that there are also many light color Jews, and many of them have lived in Europe for generations. So again, we've got to be very, very careful to as to what we allow into our minds and in our homes. So I hope you're able to have a good conversation with this individual and that things can get sorted out. That would be really good. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my power because my power cable came undone. So I better plug it in. So one moment. All right. Sorry for that. Moving on. Another question: will there be death in the millennium? Well, there's the possibility of death. So yes, there very much is. Oops, let me go back. Can you hear me? All right. Looks like for some reason my microphone came unplugged. All right. Hopefully you guys, let me double check here. Check one. All right, good. Looks like we're good. Okay, so um okay, looks like we got the sound figured out. Sorry about that, guys. All right, so let me go back. This is the question was about the two covenants in Galatians. So I'll just read it again because I don't know exactly how much we missed there. That's the joy of doing a live show, right? All right, so it says, tell me, you who desire to be under the law, do you hear the law? For it is written that Abraham had two sons, the one by a bondwoman, the other by a free woman. But he who was of the bondwoman was born according to the flesh, and he of the bondwoman through promise. Which things are symbolic? For these are the two covenants, the one from Mount Sinai, which gives birth to bondage, which is Hagar. For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to Jerusalem, which now is, and is in bondage with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free, which is the mother of us all. Now, we spoke about these covenants earlier in the show, and what I want to point out here for you is that what happened at Mount Sinai. God entered into a covenant, right? He entered into a covenant with the people of Israel. That was a marriage covenant. We read that in Jeremiah 31, verse 32. Not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers when I took them out of Egypt and led them by the hand, my covenant which they broke, though I was a husband to them, right? And then we talked about how that covenant ended in divorce. All right. So that's the covenant that that the current day Jerusalem that Paul was talking about was still engaged in. And for the most part, most Jews are still in that first marriage covenant that was established at Mount Sinai. Now, that covenant ended in divorce for the northern kingdom of Israel. And the um, the house of Judah was, yes, considered an adulterous wife. So, what's the other covenant? Well, we're told in Jeremiah 31, behold, the days are coming when I'll make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, right? A new covenant. So the new one is also a marriage covenant. How do I know that? Well, Jeremiah 31, for example, but let's also take a look at Hosea chapter 1. All right, so he's speaking primarily to the house of Israel, but then he says here, lo ruchama, I will not have mercy on the house of Israel, yet I will have mercy in the house of Judah. All right, so that's an important distinction. And then he says, Lo ami, not my people. Who is he talking to? To the house of Israel, not my people, house of Israel. And then he talks about the number of the children of Israel will be as the sand of the sea, which could not be measured. Where it was said, You are not my people, that's speaking of the house of Israel. It shall be said to them, You are sons of the living God. Then Judah, the children of Judah, and the children of Israel shall be gathered together and appoint for themselves one head. Okay, wow, that's really amazing stuff. Okay, now in chapter 2, it's similar kind of language. Bring charges against your mother. Bring charges, for she is not my wife, and I'm not her husband. So that first marriage contract ended in divorce, and God says, all right, that's it. All right, and I'm not going to have mercy on her children, right? Because he named her Lo Ruchama. He said that to the house of Israel. But then look what he says. I will allure her, bring her into the wilderness. All right. And she's going to call me my husband. Not going to talk about the Baalim anymore. And she says, God says, excuse me, I will betroth you to me forever. Yes, I'll betroth you to me in righteousness and justice and loving kindness and in mercy. I'll betroth you to me in faithfulness. This is marriage language. Okay. You call me my husband. I'm going to betroth you. This is another marriage that's taking place here. Right. And then it says, then say to those who were not my people, you are my people. And they will say, you are my God. All right. So he's talking to the house of Israel, very much so, but he's also going to put the house of Israel and the house of Judah back together. So this is an important theme that has been left out. It's been left out in Western theology for the most part for roughly the last 2,000 years. All right, that's the scary realization. I came to this realization some years ago. Some of my co-authors came to this realization. I'm not the first guy by any means, but when I saw it, I kind of wept because I just couldn't. I was like, wow, that's really wild, Lord. Now, let's take a look here at where else we find this. We find it in Romans 9:25 and 26. Paul says this, right? So he says, it says, even us whom he called, not of the Jews only, but also of the Gentiles, as he says in Hosea, I will call them my people who were not my people, and her beloved who was not beloved. It's going to pass in place where it said to them, you're not my people. They should be called sons of the living God. Right. So he's talking about putting these two houses back together. So the marriage that happened at Sinai, that's the first covenant, that was a bondage covenant. Now it is because it ended in divorce. It wasn't when it started, but it was when it ended. It ended with the divorce of the northern kingdom of Israel and the estrangement, let's call it, of the house of Judah, right? And so then the husband came, Jesus, he died, and that first marriage contract died with him. And now a new marriage contract is in place. And you can join in, you become part of this betrothal process, be part of the bride, and you can be part of the heavenly Jerusalem. And of course, we know the heavenly Jerusalem is likened unto a bride. We see that very clearly in Revelation chapter 19. We also see it in Isaiah chapter 54, right? So we see very, very similar language in Isaiah 54. So, so that's kind of the long and the short of it. It's a great question. Probably a lot more should be said and could be said, but I'm going to move on just for the sake of time. But there we go. All right. So this is from Diana. She says, understanding that all are erroneous, even perhaps heretical, what is the difference between dispensationalism, replacement theology, and predestination? They seem to me all to be saying the same hateful thing. Well, Diana, when we talk about dispensationalism and replacement theology, we definitely have apples. I have a feeling that predestination might be an orange. So I don't know if I can necessarily talk about that. Predestination is something that comes out of Calvinism, and Calvinism generally is part of replacement theology, but not always. Okay, so we're kind of talking about a couple different things here. So dispensationalism and replacement theology really have to do with who we understand Israel to be. Dispensationalism says there is this entity called the church, and there's another entity called Israel, that is the Jews in their mind. And whereas replacement theology says there's this entity called the church, which is Israel. All right, so that's the distinction. Now, predestination was very much a Calvinistic doctrine, which suggests that those who are the elect were elected for salvation, eternal salvation, nothing to do with this earth. But we know in Scripture, and I wrote a paper on this. If you want to check it out, it's on my website, douglashamp.com. And it's called Why God Did Not Elect Calvinists. All right. So in that paper, I show that election has nothing to do with eternal salvation. It's talking about the national election, the corporate election, God's choosing of Israel to be his special people. And it's always been about Israel. And this is something that both of those systems fail to see, that when God chose, or when he talks about the elect, when any of the biblical authors are talking about the elect, they are talking about the commonwealth of Israel as a whole, is what they're talking about. Now, because the whole idea of the commonwealth and the idea of the marriage and the divorce and the remarriage has been left out of Christian theology for the last 2,000 years, more or less, then it has very much skewed who the elect are. And so, under Calvin's understanding, he's thinking he was taught that the elect are individual Christians, and so because they have been elected, and obviously some people weren't elected, that in his mind, it meant that God elected, Christians A, B, and C to be saved and go to heaven, and the other people of the world, he simply didn't choose, and they're by default going to hell. So, a couple different things there. So, I hope that helps you understand a little bit. Awesome. Carol says, who do you say the 144,000 are in Revelation 7? Are they ethnic Jews or are they from the Commonwealth of Israel, thereby being from all nations? Good question, Carol. So it clearly says in Revelation 7 that they are from all 12 tribes. Now, I've heard this stated many times that they're going to be 144,000 Jews. I've heard that, and that is incorrect. That is very incorrect. It's just not accurate to say that the 144,000, which are from the 12 tribes, are all Jewish. Now, certainly the house of Judah or the tribe of Judah would be Jews, because that is what a Jew means. That's what Yehudi is, where we get the word Jew. It's from Judah. And so by definition, that's what a Jew is. Now, when the United Kingdom split into two around 932 BC, it split into the house of Israel in the north, which had 10 tribes. So that was Naphtali, Asher, um, oh gosh, all those guys, right? Yeah, all those guys up there. And in the south, we had the house of Judah. So that included obviously the tribe of Judah, but it also included the tribe of Benjamin. Okay. So, and the northern kingdom also had, of course, Ephraim and Manasseh. Those would account for the house of, or the tribe of Joseph, but that split into two. And of course, all those other guys, right? So, which I'm blanking right now. So, all those are their own distinct tribes. Now, what happened to the 10 tribes that were taken out during the exile under Sennacherib II at around 722 BC? Well, they were taken out. They were swallowed up, assimilated into the nations, and they became part of the Gentiles, right? They weren't just, living on the outskirts of town, but they became part of it. They were very much part of the nations because they were no longer God's people. They lost that special, unique status, and they just became part of everybody else. And that's what happened to them. And so this would strongly suggest, yes, that when God chooses these people, and only he knows who they are, that he is somehow going to, figure out their tribal status. I have no idea how to know that, but I know that God knows, and he will, he'll figure that out. Diana asked a question. One of the things I detest about mainstream Christianity or churchianity is when popular televangelists peddle things like prayer clause to gullible masses. But what about this passage in Scripture? Is this even possibility today? Right. So, talking about Acts 19, verse 11, this is where God did unusual acts through the disciples in those days. Let me just pull that up for you guys, and we'll take a good look at that. All right. I presume the sound is working. All right, good. Now there's sound. Excellent. I just want to make sure. Okay. So it says, now God worked unusual miracles by the hands of Paul, that even handkerchiefs or aprons were brought from his body to the sick, and the diseases left them, and the evil spirits went out of them. All right. So probably the most important word there is unusual, right? So this was not typical that God would do this. Now, does it mean that God can't do it again? Of course, God can do it again. But is he? And is he necessarily going to work through, evangelist, Joe Smith, Joe Blow, whatever, that he somehow is going to sell you for a will? for a small donation, you can get a prayer cloth that he's touched and that this is going to somehow bring about healing. I would say that probably 99.999999% of it is just charlatanry. It's shenanigans. It's snake oil. Could somebody receive one of these and maybe get healed? Possibly. And that probably has to do with the fact that, uh, these are what we call um, placebos, right? So that you believe that the cure is going to work. And then your mind tells your body, hey, I'm now healed. And this has been demonstrated both in placebos and nocebos, which is the opposite, that you think that the side effects, what you believe to be a real pill, but it's actually sugar, that it could potentially kill you if you overdose on these. All right. So this has been very well documented that the mind has incredible power to believe these various things. But I would say the vast majority, and again, 99.999999% of all that stuff is nonsense. Right. So if this were the case, then we should see a lot more people truly healed, but we don't. Um, Secondly, Paul was never ever selling these things. Paul wasn't sending them out in the mail. Here, I just touched this. Now you can have it. He wasn't doing that, right? People were certainly thronging around Paul to some degree, but we don't know entirely. If people were trying to get their handkerchief close to him, or if it's just that it happened to have touched him, um, and then this person was healed. We know that this also happened with the prophet Elisha, with his bones, that a dead man, was put into the tomb, uh, and it touched the bones of Elisha, and he was revived. Okay, so we've got to be very careful, But God is not limited, but man is sadly unlimited in the shenanigery that he can come up with. So a lot of nonsense there. All right, good question. Diana asks, "What ethnicity was Pontius Pilate?" Um, so her question is, it says that he washed his hands to divorce himself of the execution of Yeshua. It seems reminiscent of the commanded protocol set forth by God in Deuteronomy 21, 1 through 10. Well, I don't know what ethnicity he was specifically, but I do know that his wife was um, she was a God-fearer, and she was following the ways of Judaism, and so she may have been familiar with this, and then he might have been familiar with this as well. All right, so this is, if a body is found, then the leaders of the city are to go out and find out who did it. If they can't figure that out, then they have to wash their hands of this. And so he Pilate might have already known this just because he spent enough time in Jerusalem, or because of his wife's influence. That's a real possibility as well. But I don't know specifically where he's from, other than being a Roman. That's all I know. But good catch on that one. That's really a great observation. Uh, Iris asks, "What does Paul mean in Galatians 3:12 that the law is not of faith?" All right, let's take a look at that. That the law is not of faith. Okay, so let's go back a little bit. "For as many as are of the works of the law are under the curse, for it is written, cursed is everyone who does not continue in all things which are written in the book of the law to do them. But that no one is justified by the law in the sight of God is evident, for the just shall live by faith. Yet the law is not of faith, but the man who does them shall live by them. Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree." All right, so let's think of it this way. I like to use an analogy because I think it makes it very, very simple. Let's say that you're walking along on a road, and there's a big sheer cliff by that curve. Okay, and there are a lot of signs. There's a guardrail. If you observe the signs that say, "Be careful, danger, watch out, don't go too fast," and you maybe bump into that guardrail and it keeps you from falling off the cliff, right? Then the law is very good. It's preventative. The law is preventative and it'll keep you alive. But then let's say that you go over to that edge, you step up on that guardrail, and then you jump off. Now, as you're falling to your death, you might be thinking, I should have listened to the signs. I should have watched out and paid attention to the guardrail. But now I'm falling. What power does the law have at that point to save you? It has zero power at all. And now you're under another curse, which is uh, the curse of gravity, okay? Because it's going to pull you down until you die. So because you transgressed the law, there is a curse that goes along with transgressing a various law. We see this very, very obvious when it comes to the law of gravity, or let's say the law of electricity, right? Electricity can bring me incredible blessing. It can help me. It can warm my home. It can heat my food, do all kinds of stuff. But if I put both of my hands on a live wire, it'll kill me. And then what was good can become a curse to me. And I might be thinking, gee, I should not have done this while I'm getting electrocuted, but it's too late by then. Okay. So the only option, the only promise of salvation in both of those scenarios of jumping off over the guardrail or holding on to electricity is I need a savior. I need someone else to come and intervene and save me. I need a big hand to come and scoop me up so I don't hit the ground and lift me up, or someone to knock me off that electricity or turn it off, even better, so that I don't die. Now, what should my response be the next time? Should I go and hold on to the live wire again? No, that would be very foolish. Right. So Paul is in no way saying that the law is bad. He says many times in his writings that the law is good. Romans 3:31. We establish the law. We don't get rid of it. We establish it. So we have to just, of course, keep that in mind. But he's not in any way speaking against the law. All right. Let's move on here. We have Stephanie. She has a comment. People say that the Palestinians are the real Jews. It's strange. I agree with you there. It is very strange. Now, something on that point, Stephanie, is that when when the British came into the area known as Palestine, why was it called Palestine? It was under Caesar Hadrian, who renamed Judea Palestina, because he was so mad at the Jews for staging a second Jewish revolt that he decided to change the name of the entire area to Palestina. And he changed the name of Jerusalem to Elio Capitolina. And so it was known as Palestine for roughly 2,000 years. So everybody living there, whether you were Jewish, you're Muslim, Christian, you were known as a Palestinian. Okay. And then when the British came, the name was still there. Many, many, many Jews were called Palestinians. But then, of course, after the British left and they let the UN handle the area, then it separated into the Jews and the other people that were not Jews, who were known as Palestinians. All right. So that's just something to think about. Do you know who the woman is in John 1:1? So I think John 1:1 is, in the beginning was the Word. I'm going to guess you're referring to 2 John 1. I think that's what you're referring to. Well, let's take a look at that. So 2 John 1, to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth, and not only I, but all those who have known the truth. I think that's probably who you're referring to. So I would suggest that the elect lady is speaking of it's speaking of the commonwealth of Israel. Who are the elect? This is a very important question. Who are the elect? The elect are Israel. Okay, the elect are Israel. God married Israel. He chose Israel. We see this in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 6. Let me take you there really quick. Deuteronomy 7:6. All right. So for you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord has chosen you to be a people for himself. Okay. So chosen, elect, they're the same exact word, and a special treasure above all the peoples on the face of the earth. Okay. So that's who God chose. God's choosing did not change one iota. So what's John getting at? Certainly he's talking to people who believe in Jesus, right? Well, yes. And we see this in the writings of Paul as well in the book of Ephesians. He's talking to you Gentiles who were formerly Gentiles, okay? But you're not anymore. Now you're part of the commonwealth of Israel. Your fellow citizens of Israel. So that's what he's getting at. And so this elect lady is this bride that God had prophesied that he would remarry, he'd betroth. And we saw that in the book of Hosea today on the show. So that's who he's talking about. All right. Pastor Doug, is there a bride of the Lamb and of the Father ending up as two wives? I'm sorry for the question, but the teaching is out there. BB Boy 11. I don't know what that is. BB Boy 11. I know the teaching is out there. This is something that is going around in dispensational circles, and it greatly bothers me because it is so far from the truth, right? It's just wrong, wrong, wrong. There is one bride. The bride is Israel. Now, this is where Christians will say, but Doug, wait a second. What about the New Testament? Haven't you read the New Testament, right? I've read the New Testament. I've also read the Old Testament, and I know that there's one bride. So who was it that came down to earth? Who was it that was the Word made flesh, right? Who was it that was Emmanuel? That was Jesus, and Jesus is God, right? That makes it easy, okay? So Jesus is God. That's very important for our story. If Jesus is not God, then we've got a whole bunch of really weird story parts that don't fit at all. But Jesus is God. Jesus, or God, let's say, married Israel back in the wilderness. And then that marriage that was established at Mount Sinai, that ended in divorce for what we know as Israel, for the 10 tribes, and then for estrangement, because Judah was even worse than Israel, and she became an estranged wife, an adulterous wife as well. So, because there are some dispensationalists who want to maintain a very clear, marked difference between the church and the Jews, they will say that Jehovah has a wife, that is Israel, and Jesus has a bride, that is the church. I radically and strongly disagree with that teaching. I think it creates tremendous confusion. I think it is wrong on so many levels. Again, you have to go back to understand the marriage, divorce, and then the remarriage of God with Israel. We saw it right there in Hosea chapter 2, that he's going to betroth Israel to himself again. That's because he divorced her. And so he's going to put it all back together. But again, the dispensationalists don't really like that idea, because that would suggest that if we're part of Israel, if we Christians are part of Israel, not that we've replaced them, but we've been grafted into them, well, that would suggest that maybe we should keep the Sabbath. And that would suggest that maybe we should not eat pork. And that would suggest that maybe we should keep the feast. And I would agree. Yes, those suggestions are accurate. But a lot of people don't want to do that because they think that they've been told this Marcionistic lie that the law is bad, and that Jesus came to free us from that terrible, onerous, heavy law. And so it takes time to help people kind of understand these things. Okay, so just a follow-up question there. But if Jesus and the Father are one, then why two brides? Well, again, there are not two brides. There's one. There's only one. Okay, what has happened in Israel has really accelerated the need to learn the truth. I totally agree with you there. Let's see, a little bit of commentary that's going on. Fantastic. Love it. Okay, these are great questions, guys. Thank you. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate your questions. These were fantastic. Keep them coming. I love the questions. That's what makes the show great. Okay, so this is a very interactive show. Again, you can put your questions here in the chat, and I'll get to those, or you can put them in the Way Congregation app in the message part, and I will get to those at the beginning of each show. So until next time, God bless you. I hope you stay in the Word. If you are, um, um, well, let's see. Actually, I think I missed one. Let me just get to these before we call it a day. Okay, good. Can you please explain First Peter 3:19 through 20? I'm glad I saw those. I almost missed them. All right, so First Peter 3:19. All right, so uh, talking about Jesus going down and preaching to those in prison who formerly were disobedient when once the divine long suffering waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is, 8 souls, were saved through water. Well, my opinion is that Jesus went down into the place known as Hades or Sheol, that is the grave. He went down there for 3 days, right? I mean, he was dead. We know that. He was in the grave, right? The tomb, the physical tomb, he was in that for 3 days. But where was his spirit? I argue, based on this passage, that he actually went down into the abode of the dead, and he preached, and not preached as in speaking of here's good news, but he proclaimed. That's the Greek word keruso right there. Keruso. He proclaimed that he had conquered death, and that I believe is when he took the keys from Satan, the keys of Hades and death, right? He took those, which Jesus kind of boasts about a little bit, which I think is really, really awesome, right? So in Revelation chapter 1, he says, the mystery of the seven stars saw my right hand. All right. Sorry. Here we go. I am he who lives and was dead, and behold, I'm alive forevermore. And I have the keys of Hades and death. I think that Jesus acquired the keys of Hades and death when he went down there. Why did he have to do that? Well, according to Hebrews chapter 2, according to Hebrews chapter 2, it says that inasmuch as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, he himself likewise shared in the same, that through death he might destroy him who had the power of death, that is, the devil, and release those who through fear of death, who were all their lifetime subject to bondage. All right, so I think he went down. He spoke to uh, the the fallen angels who back in the days of Noah, they came down, they did their naughty stuff. And he said, I have now conquered death. That would be my explanation of it. All right. Guys, if I didn't get to your question, you might want to just text me if I didn't get it. Otherwise, I hope to get them next week. God bless you and stay in God's